Welcome to another edition of Inside the Zone on Wayne.com. Plenty to talk about this week as we're about halfway through the regular season. It seems hard to believe, but some huge games last week, one of the best slates we've had all year. And it starts with Belmont at Norwell, and that was one whale of a ball game, 28-7 Belmont. What do you see and what do you take away from that game if you're the Belmont Braves?
Well, you take away that your running game is almost unstoppable, and your defense is just as good. They just shut down the night rushing attack, and then offensively they just killed Norwell with their running game, outgaining them 316-12. So, and they held one of the best runners in the area, Clay Fichter, to 20 yards. So what I take away is that we've got an elite program now at Belmont.
Yeah, you take a look at the numbers, I believe 34 yards of total offense for Norwell on that one, and Fichter, depending on how you calculate the direct snap, 20 yards rushing or 0 yards rushing. As far as that goes, where do you go from here if you're Norwell? Because you know maybe you need to develop that passing game just a little bit more.
Well, you do, but Norwell's not going to play Belmont every week, so they don't need to get too down on themselves. They played well up until this point. They just played one of the state's best teams last week. That was their problem. But they have another tough test this week in New Haven. So I wouldn't jump off the ledge, so to speak, if I'm Norwell quite yet. But yeah, you've got to have a little bit more balance in your offense if your running game is not as strong as, let's say, Belmont's. Belmont doesn't need balance because nobody can stop their running game.
And talking about that Belmont defense, which may be a little bit underrated because their offense is so explosive, what do you take away from that game if you're Homestead watching that game on tape? I know Homestead's a little more of a balanced offense than Norwell, but what are you thinking heading into this game against this week, which we'll talk a little bit about later?
You really need Zach Terrell to be able to pass the ball against Belmont. The problem with Homestead's attack this week is they're not going to be on the field very much because Belmont just runs the clock. With their running game so strong, they whittle the clock down to almost nothing, and so you have very few possessions in the game. So Homestead has to take advantage of every opportunity offensively they have. They can't have 3 and outs. They can't have punts. They definitely can't have turnovers. When they get the ball, which will be very rarely, they have to score.
Yeah, and you want to talk about some other big games this week. Down at Harding, it was Lures against Harding. Lures hasn't exactly had the season that many people were hoping they would have, although we knew they were going to be replacing some people. They could have been 1-3 after this game. Instead, they're 2-2, and they got a win over a Harding team that has the most talented player in the area.
Lures is not nearly as bad as some people think they are. Yes, they're not meeting the expectations that some Lures fans have, but they're a pretty good team, and they show in spots they can play really well. Last week, they played exceptionally well defensively. They forced 7 turnovers by Harding, or maybe Harding committed 7 turnovers themselves, depending on your perspective. But Lures is not nearly as bad as people think they are, or those critics say they are, and they're going to be in most games this year.
You know, interestingly enough, we saw some direct snaps to Kenny Mullen in that game. He scampered a 52-yard touchdown in, and we saw the direct snap to Clay Fichter, which kind of had the opposite effect, 25-yard loss against Norwell. Is that something now that seems like a lot of NFL teams are going to the Wildcat, and people are putting that package in college as well. Is that something that's filtered on down to the high school level, you think?
Well, no matter what business you're in, you copy what works. And when the high school and college coaches see on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, hey, that worked, then they implement it, especially with a guy like Kenny Mullen. Or Fichter's effective too, but Kenny Mullen, he is so fast and so strong, he can beat you any number of ways. But yes, what is it? Copying is the greatest form of flattery, and so when something works for the, let's say, the Jacksonville Jaguars, well, yeah, Matt Lindsay at Lures is going to implement that.
And if you're Matt Lindsay, do you feel like, not necessarily this is a turnaround win for you guys, but it kind of gets them back to where their confidence level normally is for Lures when you get a victory? I mean, Rod Smith had 169 yards, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of yards, but they still managed to kind of hold fort and hold sway, I guess you'd say, against this good team.
You know, you're not going to stop Rod Smith. He's going to get 169 against no matter who he plays. And so you can't really worry about that too much. But yeah, it boosts Lures' confidence. And I think every time that they're in a game or every time that they win a game, they're going to feel that much stronger. And what you need to keep in mind is in the SAC, there's Bishop Dwenger, and then there's really everybody else until you get down to the Northsides, Northrops, and Elmhursts and those teams. there's a big clump of competitive teams there, of which Lures is a part of. And they're playing in one of the best conferences in the state, if not the best. So Lures has nothing to hang their head about, especially when they go into sectionals. They're going to be able to do some damage.
All right, so we've hit on the big NHC game. We've hit on the big SAC game. I want to hit on now the big ACAC game. Leo, who everyone picks as seems, or at least you've picked definitely, as the conference favorite going in against Southern Wells, the defending conference champs. And 43-27 in that one, Leo. Seems like the Lions are just kind of on the path and have figured things out and are ready to take over the championship lead in that conference.
Well, their young players are getting more mature and they're playing better and better, but the problem with Southern Wells last week was they fumbled the ball 4 times and lost 2 of them. And when you're Southern Wells playing a bigger school, you cannot turn the ball over, especially 2 times or 4 fumbles, and so that's what ended up hurting them. They struggled against Garrett, they struggled against Leo, and so did Adams Central. Those are 2 smaller schools that really had a tough time dealing with the bigger opponents. And Leo is just getting better and better, just like they did last year. They got better as the season went along. They're doing it again this year.
You know, when we talk about the elite players, we talk about, obviously, Fichter, especially when it comes to running backs, and Rod Smith and some of the other players in the SAC. But is Connor Kasser, he's a junior for Leo, is he one of the guys that maybe just gets overlooked because of the size of a conference that he plays in, but is really a talented player?
Well, as they win more and more games, he'll get more and more attention, especially if they go deep into the tournament. He'll get more and more attention. But believe me, Mark Lefevre down at Southern Wells knows who he is, and he had an excellent game last week. The Leo offense exploded for 36 points in the first half alone. So, yeah, Kasker's a tough